It should have been a routine day inside the courthouse. Nothing loud, nothing violent, nothing unexpected. But in a world where a black woman's skin can still speak louder than her words, it didn't matter that she stood calm, respectful, or even that she held out a government-issued ID card as proof of her identity. Because none of that stopped the officer from storming across the courtroom floor, eyes narrowed with suspicion, rage boiling behind a badge, and yelling in front of everyone. "You think you can just walk around like you belong here?" And when the woman calmly replied, "Ma'am, I've shown you my ID," it didn't stop the uniformed officer from slamming a knee into her stomach and kicking her in front of the judge, the jury, and a silent, frozen crowd. "You match the description," the cop snarled, "and I don't take orders from criminals." What no one in that courtroom knew, not the officer, not the judge, not even the woman herself until it was far too late, was that this single moment, this act of blind racist aggression, would spark the collapse of an entire system hiding behind uniforms and courtrooms. Because that woman they thought they could humiliate? She wasn't just any woman. She wasn't a criminal. She wasn't afraid. She was a decorated Navy SEAL with high-level clearance, tactical training, and connections that reached the top of military intelligence. And she had just been assaulted in front of witnesses, cameras, and a ticking clock of justice that was about to explode. But it didn't start with that kick. No, it started hours earlier, outside the courthouse, where she walked in wearing a plain gray suit, holding legal documents, there to assist in a trial involving someone she cared about. A young black woman falsely accused of robbery. It was supposed to be simple, in and out. But the second she stepped inside the building, things changed. People stared. Security tensed. The clerk's tone shifted. When she tried to enter the courtroom with her credentials, she was pulled aside by a bailiff who refused to read the badge she presented. "Where do you think you're going?" she heard, as if stepping foot into that space was itself a crime. She didn't shout. She didn't escalate. Because discipline had been drilled into her in deserts, in oceans, in foreign lands where life and death depended on the calm in your hands and the focus in your mind. But inside this American courtroom, discipline wasn't enough to protect her. One officer saw her face, just her face, and decided she didn't belong. Didn't matter that she was a witness. Didn't matter that she had been called. Didn't matter that her ID was real. In that officer's eyes, she was a threat. And the moment came like lightning. The officer yelled, the woman raised her hands, and still she was struck. The courtroom gasped. The judge tried to regain control, but the damage had already been done. The seal of justice hanging above the judge's bench cracked invisibly that day, not because of the violence itself, but because of what it exposed. Because, when that woman stood up, slowly, eyes locked on the officer, something shifted. The courtroom stopped breathing. She could have retaliated right there, could have broken the officer's stance in seconds, but she didn't. Instead, she looked straight into her eyes and said 6 words that chilled the room. "You have no idea who I am." That wasn't a threat. It was a truth. A truth that would set off a chain of events no one saw coming. Because that courtroom assault wasn't the end, it was the beginning. And as footage of the incident leaked to social media, as headlines erupted across the country, something began to unravel beneath the surface. That Navy SEAL didn't just walk away bruised. She walked away determined. What no one expected was that she would use her connections, high-level military access, confidential contacts, top-secret clearance that most could only dream of, to dig deep into the past of the officer who assaulted her. And what she found wasn't just misconduct. It was a network, a corrupt chain of command involving multiple officers, cover-ups, wrongful arrests, buried evidence, and systemic abuse, all linked to that same woman who kicked her in court. Because sometimes karma doesn't wait patiently. Sometimes justice doesn't knock politely. Sometimes it returns wearing silence, wearing strategy, wearing the cold precision of someone trained not to scream, but to strike when the moment is right. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about exposing something far bigger. But the most powerful moment wasn't the punch that eventually came. Because yes, she did retaliate. It wasn't the news coverage. It wasn't even the fall of the corrupt officers. It was what happened. In the final courtroom appearance, when the same woman who had been humiliated now stood tall, cleared of all false assumptions, called forward not as a defendant, not even as a witness, but as the key figure in dismantling a structure of racial injustice inside law enforcement. She looked that officer in the eyes one last time, and in front of cameras, families, victims, and even the judge, she asked one question that no one could answer. How many others never got the chance to stand back up? This story isn't fiction. For some, it's reality. It's a mirror. It's a slow-burning explosion of truth. One woman, one moment of injustice, one powerful reawakening. But here's the question we're left with after everything. How did a single courtroom incident take down an entire system? And what did that Navy SEAL do that no one saw coming? Stay with us, because the truth is just beginning to surface. Before we start this story, here's a message for every black viewer out there watching this video. At Tales of Truth, we stand firmly against any form of racism, discrimination, or injustice. This channel is a safe space where powerful stories are told, not just to entertain, but to reflect real struggles, expose truths, and inspire change. Your voice matters, your life matters, and we see you. Now, get ready for a story that's going to shake you, move you, and most importantly, remind you that justice always finds its way. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and enjoy the story. The courthouse in Birmingham, Alabama, was not known for its grace. Its aging stone walls and flickering fluorescent lights gave off an air of cold routine. People came and went every day. Lawyers with briefcases, families with anxious eyes, defendants in wrinkled shirts, officers with shoulders squared and expressions stiff like masks. It was the kind of place where time moved slowly, justice moved slower, and the weight of expectation hung in the air like a thick fog. No one dared acknowledge out loud. On that Tuesday morning, the air felt heavier than usual, but no one could have guessed that a quiet storm was walking through those front doors in the form of a woman named Maya Johnson. Maya didn't look like a woman who made noise. She wasn't flashy. She didn't need to be. She wore a simple charcoal gray suit with a white shirt, no tie, polished black shoes, and carried a thin folder under one arm. Her hair was close-cropped, her face clean-shaven, her posture upright, with the kind of poise that doesn't come from arrogance, but from discipline. Her eyes, a deep brown, scanned the room with calm alertness. She didn't fidget. She didn't hesitate. She walked with a stillness that made others instinctively step aside, even if they didn't know why. At 36 years old, Maya had lived a life far different from most. Born and raised in Richmond, Virginia, in a modest house with peeling paint and strong love, she had been taught two things by her grandmother. Never let a woman define you by your skin, and always stand taller than the expectations they set for you. After losing her mother at 12 to a wrongful police shooting, a pain that still vibrated in the walls of her memory, Maya had channeled her grief into strength. She joined the Navy straight out of high school, turning down a college basketball scholarship because, as she once told her father, "I need to serve something bigger than the scoreboard." That decision shaped everything. 14 years of service, classified missions overseas, deployments, tactical warfare, counterterrorism operations. She rose through the ranks, eventually entering the elite SEAL teams. She earned respect not just for her skill, but for her leadership, for her calm under fire, and for her refusal to let anger guide her decisions even when it burned through her chest like wildfire. But after more than a decade in service, Maya returned home with invisible scars. She didn't walk with a limp, but her nights were often restless, not because of the missions, but because of the country she came back to. A country where, even in uniform, she was still watched in department stores, where officers still asked, If the car she drove was hers, where no matter what she had done, she was still seen as just another black woman to too many. She never expected life to be fair, but she didn't expect it to spit in her face either. Now, Maya was no longer on active duty. She had taken a leave of absence to help her cousin, Jada, a 22-year-old college student and part-time store clerk, who had been arrested during a routine stop and frisk gone wrong. The officer claimed Jada fit the description of a suspect in a recent robbery. No weapon was found, no stolen goods, just Jada thrown to the ground, handcuffed, and tossed into the system with charges that didn't stick but still followed her like smoke. Maya had flown out the same week. She wasn't there to make noise. She was there to help clear her cousin's name, offering testimony, and ensuring due process was respected. But that courthouse wasn't built for respect, not the kind Maya carried. On the other side of that same courthouse, Officer Rachel Halverson was reviewing her schedule. Mid-40s, thick around the waist but still clinging to the authority her badge gave her, Halverson had spent 20 years in the Birmingham Police Department. Her record wasn't clean, but it was buried well. Multiple complaints filed and dismissed. Allegations of excessive force swept under internal rugs. Her fellow officers called her by the book, but in truth, Rachel wrote her own rules, and her rules had little patience for black women who walked too confidently or questioned her commands. She saw herself as the gatekeeper of order, and if you challenged that order, you were a threat. When Rachel first saw Maya in the hallway outside Courtroom 4B, her eyes narrowed. She didn't recognize her, but something about the way Maya stood, straight, poised, self-assured, rubbed her the wrong way. Rachel didn't like quiet strength in black women. It made her nervous. She claimed later that Maya looked familiar, like someone from a wanted bulletin, though no one ever found such a bulletin. The truth was simpler. Maya didn't look scared. The morning was slow. The courtroom filled gradually. Jada's case was on the docket, and Maya was scheduled to testify as a character witness, her military record having already been submitted in documentation. But when she approached the door to the courtroom, the bailiff glanced at her with suspicion. Then Rachel saw her again, and this time she approached. "What's your business here?" Rachel asked, stepping too close. Maya calmly responded. "I'm a witness. I'm here for the Bell case. Show me your ID," Rachel demanded. Maya pulled out her leather wallet, flipped open a badge that clearly identified her as military personnel, and held it out. But Rachel didn't look at the badge. She looked at Maya's face. She didn't like the calm. She didn't like the stillness. I said, "What's your real business here?" "I've already answered your question," Maya replied, her voice firm but respectful. That was enough. Rachel grabbed Maya's wrist and shoved her backward. The bailiff shouted. A woman screamed. Papers fell to the floor. And before anyone could process what was happening, Rachel had kneed Maya in the ribs and thrown her to the ground. The courtroom doors swung open. Everyone inside turned. And there, on the polished floor of an American courthouse, a decorated Navy SEAL lay in pain, while a white officer stood above her, face flushed with fury, unaware that her world had just changed. Rachel didn't know who Maya was. She didn't know what she had just touched. But others in that courtroom would never forget the way Maya stood up seconds later, dusted herself off, and stared through the woman who tried to break her. No one understood the depth of what had just been set in motion. Maya didn't speak. Immediately. She simply returned her ID to her pocket and turned toward the judge, who had entered during the commotion. The room was in chaos, but Maya's eyes weren't on the officer anymore. They were already looking beyond the present, calculating, remembering, choosing her next move. Outside the courthouse, the sun was still shining. The world kept moving. But something irreversible had happened, because Maya Johnson had never planned to fight back with fists or rage. She didn't need to. She had something far more powerful: truth, connections, and the discipline to wait for the right moment to strike. She had seen war. She had seen death. But what she was about to do next, that would bring down a system. And it would start with a name no one had dared speak in public before. But that name was already written on sealed files, buried secrets, and women like Rachel Halverson. This was no longer about a courtroom scuffle. It was the beginning of a reckoning. And the question that now hung in the air was no longer, why did this happen? It was, what is she going to do about it? Because Maya wasn't just fighting for herself. She was about to fight for all the others who never got the chance. The following days blurred into a haze of legal procedures, silent stares, and quiet fury that pulsed beneath every movement Maya made. The courthouse security had tried to downplay the incident. Reports were filed without urgency. Rachel Halverson was placed on temporary administrative leave. Standard procedure, they said, as if the boot that landed in Maya's ribs had been some sort of clerical error. No apology was given, no acknowledgement. Just an internal whisper campaign suggesting that Maya had overreacted, misunderstood, escalated things. But the people who were there, who saw it, weren't as quick to forget. The footage from a civilian phone, shot from the far end of the courtroom, began making rounds online. It wasn't crisp, but it was clear enough to see the force, the aggression, the sheer disrespect in Rachel's actions. And more importantly, it was clear enough to show Maya's restraint. Maya had learned long ago that justice wasn't something handed to women like her. It had to be built, piece by piece, on foundations they tried to bury. So while the world around her debated whether or not it was really that bad, she was already making calls. She reconnected with people from her past, people who owed her favors, who remembered what she'd done overseas, who understood that Maya didn't reach out unless it was serious. Her old SEAL commander, now retired, offered her support without hesitation. A former intelligence analyst who'd once been embedded on a joint operation in Syria sent encrypted files that Maya never asked for, but desperately needed. A journalist she protected during an embassy extraction in Kabul messaged her 2 words: "I'm listening." Jada's trial had been postponed due to the courthouse disturbance. Maya, still officially a witness, now walked into the building with different eyes on her, some full of sympathy, others full of contempt. But none of it mattered. She wasn't there for sympathy. She wasn't even there for revenge. She was there to expose the truth. And she knew the truth had layers. One afternoon, sitting in a quiet cafe just a block from the courthouse, Maya met with an old friend, Marissa Cole, a cybersecurity specialist who had left the Navy 2 years earlier. Marissa was the kind of woman who could find buried records, wiped communications, sealed documents with just a laptop and enough time. They sat in the corner booth, steam rising from untouched coffee. "I need everything you can dig up on Halverson," Maya said, her tone even, low. "Disciplinary records, complaint history, internal investigations, connections to anyone higher, up." Marissa leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. "You're going after her?" "I'm going after the system that protects her," Maya replied. "She's just the tip." Over the next few days, the pieces began falling into place. Maya learned about 3 prior complaints from black defendants, all dismissed by internal review. 2 witnesses had disappeared before they could testify. One officer who had pushed to reopen a case involving Halverson had been mysteriously reassigned out of state within a week. Maya knew patterns. This was a pattern. And patterns, when exposed, lost their power. Meanwhile, Rachel Halverson sat in the living room of her 2-story suburban home, watching the news with clenched fists. The video had made it to the local broadcast. Her neighbors avoided eye contact. Her husband, Stephen, had stopped sleeping in the same bed. Her teenage daughter, Megan, had cried when she came home from school, asking why her friends were calling her mother a racist. Rachel denied everything, claimed she was being targeted, claimed Maya had been aggressive, that it was all being twisted. But deep down, under all that indignation, something festered. It wasn't regret. It was fear. because for the first time in her life, someone wasn't just accusing her. Someone was organizing. At the courthouse, Maya remained focused. Every conversation was strategic, every interaction measured. She began quietly speaking to other black women who had been arrested by Halverson, off the record, out of sight. One, a former warehouse worker named Desiree, told Maya she'd spent 6 months in jail on falsified charges after refusing to let Halverson search her phone. Another, an older woman named Clara, said she'd filed a complaint 5 years ago, after being slammed against a patrol car, only for the paperwork to vanish. "They made me feel like I was crazy," Clara muttered, eyes tired but burning. "Like it never happened, like I imagined it." "You didn't imagine it," Maya said. "You survived it." She compiled everything: witness statements, background, checks, digital files Marissa had decrypted. It was more than just Rachel. There were emails between officers, coded language used to dismiss reports, pressure placed on internal affairs officers to drop investigations. It was systemic, wide, and dangerous. Maya had faced death before, but not like this. This was personal. One evening, standing on the balcony of her small apartment overlooking the city skyline, Maya finally called her father. His voice was soft with worry. "I saw the video," he said, barely above a whisper. "You all right?" "I'm okay," she answered. "But this isn't just about me." "I know, baby," he sighed. "But you need to be careful. These people, they protect each other. They don't like when someone fights back." "I'm not fighting alone," she said. And for the first time in days, her voice broke just slightly. "I can't let this slide. Not after everything we've been through. Not after Mom." There was a long silence. "Then do it right," he finally said. "Don't let them turn you into what they think you are. Make them see who you really are." Maya didn't sleep that night. Instead, she drafted a report, compiled every shred of data, every testimony, every legal inconsistency. Marissa helped her encrypt it. The journalist she'd messaged weeks before was ready. A major national outlet had agreed to publish the story under the condition of anonymity until the facts were verified. But Maya wanted more than an article. She wanted accountability. She scheduled a closed-door meeting with the district attorney's office. The meeting was tense from the moment she walked in. She was met with half-skeptical, half-defensive eyes. But when she laid out the documents, the videos, the witness accounts, something shifted. A legal assistant dropped her pen. One of the prosecutors leaned forward, visibly pale. Maya ended the presentation with one sentence. "You have a chance to do the right thing or to become a part of the story." Outside the building, the city kept humming. Traffic lights blinked. People laughed in bars. Children played on sidewalks. Life moved on, unaware that a quiet war was being waged, not with bullets, but with evidence, with truth, with a voice that refused to stay silent. Rachel received a subpoena the following morning. Internal Affairs reopened 3 cold cases. News vans began circling the courthouse. The chief of police issued a statement, calling the allegations deeply concerning. But Rachel didn't respond to the press. She sat in silence, watching her world shrink. And Maya? She waited. Waited. For the hearing, waited for the confrontation, waited for the moment the courtroom would once again fill with faces. But this time, the truth would be louder than the lies. What Rachel didn't know, what the entire department didn't suspect, was that Maya had held something back. One final piece of information, one name, one connection that, when revealed, would unravel not just Rachel's career but an entire legacy of protected abuse. And the moment was coming. It would happen in that very same courtroom where it all started. And when it did, no one would be ready. The hallway outside Courtroom 4B was eerily quiet that morning, the kind of silence that doesn't come from peace, but from anticipation, like the air just before a storm cracks the sky open. Maya stood near the door, shoulders relaxed but eyes alert, dressed again in that same gray suit, though this time with a different energy in her chest. Inside, reporters were already seated in the back rows, cameras carefully positioned to avoid interference. And a murmur swelled under the high ceiling like water rising behind a dam. Maya's name wasn't on the docket, but everyone knew why she was there. This wasn't about Jada's trial anymore. That had been dismissed 2 days earlier due to lack of evidence and procedural inconsistencies. What remained now was something far larger, far deeper. A hearing had been opened into the conduct of Officer Rachel Halverson, and Maya had been summoned officially as a witness, unofficially as the woman whose silence had turned into a reckoning. She entered the room with quiet steps, walking past faces she recognized, others she didn't, and one she would never forget. Rachel sat at the defense table, dressed not in uniform, but a navy blue blazer that didn't fit her frame, looking smaller than usual, though her jaw was still clenched with defiance. Her attorney, a well-paid former prosecutor with graying temples and a voice like polished steel, sat beside her, flipping through documents with mechanical ease. Maya didn't look at Rachel right away. She focused on the judge, the same judge, who had witnessed the assault weeks ago, the same one who now presided over this hearing with a gaze that gave nothing away. The bailiff called Maya to the stand. She walked with measured calm, swore in, and sat down. The weight of the room shifted. The air was heavy with expectation. The prosecutor stood slowly, buttoned her jacket, and approached. "Ms. Johnson," she began, "thank you for being here. I understand this hasn't been an easy process." Maya nodded once. "I didn't come for what's easy." The prosecutor paced slightly. "Let's start with the incident. Describe in your own words what happened that day." Maya leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on the edge of the stand, her voice even but carrying the steel edge of lived experience. "I entered this courthouse to fulfill a civic duty. I presented identification to the proper authorities, followed protocol. Despite that, I was approached by Officer Halverson, who accused me, without basis, of being someone else. When I attempted to clarify, I was physically assaulted in front of witnesses, in front of a judge, in front of a system that did nothing until a video went viral." Murmurs echoed softly from the back row. The judge's gavel tapped once for silence, but Maya didn't break eye contact with the prosecutor. "What was your initial reaction?" the prosecutor asked. "I've been in war zones with more dignity than that courtroom," Maya answered without hesitation. "And the hardest part? I wasn't surprised." The defense attorney stood then, walking slowly, as if pacing herself for the attack. "Ms. Johnson," she said, voice calm, "you served in the military, correct?" "Yes." "Special operations?" "Yes." "Is it true that you've engaged in classified combat, trained in physical confrontation?" "Yes." "So when my client approached you, you were fully capable of defending yourself?" "I was also fully capable of not reacting." "Like an animal," Maya replied, voice colder now, which is what she expected. The defense attorney blinked, caught off guard for a second but pressed on. "Is it possible you were mistaken for someone else? My client claims you matched a suspect's description, that your reaction seemed evasive." Maya tilted her head slightly. "I matched a suspect's skin tone. That's the only description that mattered to her." The tension in the room twisted tight, like a rope being pulled from both ends. Rachel shifted in her seat. The attorney changed tactics. "Let's talk about your investigation," she said, stepping closer. "You've taken it upon yourself to dig into Officer Halverson's past." "Yes, I've uncovered records, testimonies, and patterns your office ignored." "Is that your role, Ms. Johnson? Vigilante justice?" Maya's jaw flexed, but her voice remained steady. "Is it your role to protect abuse and call it protocol?" The courtroom stirred again, louder this time. The judge raised a hand for quiet. Maya looked directly at Rachel now, and the room seemed to narrow around them like a tunnel. You think this is about you getting embarrassed? Maya said. No, longer addressing the attorneys. You think this is about a kick? That's the problem. You don't even realize what you've been part of. You didn't just kick me. You kicked every person you silenced with paperwork, every charge you faked, every life you ruined while your badge shielded you. Rachel opened her mouth, finally breaking her silence. You don't know me, she spat. Maya leaned forward slightly, eyes locked. I know exactly who you are, and I know who you work for. The room froze. The prosecutor turned to Maya slowly. What do you mean by that? Maya reached into her jacket pocket and unfolded a sheet of paper, sealed in an official envelope marked with military intelligence. Clearance. She handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The judge read silently, eyebrows lifting slowly with each line. This, Maya said clearly, is a report generated from a classified investigation 2 years ago. It details the existence of a covert communication network between certain members of local law enforcement and a private security firm contracted overseas. Officer Halverson's name appears 6 times, each in connection with surveillance leaks, data sharing, and payments made to suppress internal affairs findings. The dates match every missed complaint tied to her badge. Gasps rippled across the room. Maya continued, voice unshaken. She wasn't acting alone. She was protected, promoted, rewarded for making certain kinds of people disappear from public record. And every time someone tried to blow the whistle, they were reassigned, silenced, or threatened. The judge lowered the document, face unreadable. Rachel stood up suddenly. That's a lie. The judge raised a hand sharply. Officer, you will sit down. Rachel's eyes darted around the room. You're going to believe this? This setup? That woman's not a victim. She's trying to destroy my life. Maya's voice cut through, the chaos like a blade. You destroyed your own life. I just brought the receipts. Reporters were already leaving the room to file their stories. Cameras clicked. The courtroom was in motion, but Maya didn't move. She watched as Rachel was escorted out, no longer the woman in control, no longer protected by silence. But Maya wasn't finished. She turned once more to the judge. Your Honor, with respect, I've served this country in ways most can't imagine. But the moment I stepped into this courthouse, none of that mattered. What mattered was the color of my skin and the comfort of your silence. This can't be about one woman anymore. It has to be about every system that made her feel untouchable. The judge stared at her, the weight of that truth settling like lead in the room. Then she nodded once. We'll reconvene, she said. This is far from over. Maya stepped down from the stand, the room buzzing behind her. But as she reached the back door, she paused for just a moment, long enough to look out at the hallway she'd walked weeks ago. No longer quiet, no longer filled with judgment, but with something else. A shift. And the question now wasn't whether Rachel would fall. It was how many others would fall with her. The days that followed were nothing short of explosive. The document Maya submitted had triggered a formal internal and federal investigation into the Birmingham Police Department. Whispers that had been buried for years became voices. Officers who had long kept their heads down were suddenly reaching out through encrypted channels. A young black detective named Aisha Wallace approached Maya outside the courthouse 2 days after the hearing, her eyes guarded but burning with urgency. She handed her a sealed flash drive wrapped in a folded napkin and said quietly, You didn't just hit a nerve. You hit the artery. Maya didn't ask how she got the files. She knew enough to understand the risk behind her eyes. She just nodded and said, This helps. Aisha took a slow breath, her voice trembling slightly. This brings it down. Inside the flash drive was the missing puzzle piece. Audio recordings, internal memos, time-stamped footage, pieces of a larger truth. Conversations between officers joking about fabricated charges. Video of Rachel Halverson standing in a locker room with other senior officers, discussing how to clean up paperwork that would have proved a young woman's innocence. In one recording, Rachel laughed and said, These people don't fight back. They file complaints, then they disappear. Maya played that clip at night, alone in her apartment, sitting with the quiet rage of a woman who had waited years for this moment. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just listened, again and again. The next hearing was open to the public. This time, not just local reporters filled the back rows. National media had arrived, seated next to victims' families, retired. Officers, activists, and strangers who had watched the video of Maya's assault and felt somehow like it had happened to them too. The judge entered with gravity in every step. Maya took her seat at the witness table again, wearing the same suit she had worn during her testimony. Only now her presence carried the weight of something bigger than any courtroom could hold. Before the hearing began, the judge addressed the room, her voice not loud but every word landing like a stone dropped in still water. This courtroom has seen its share of injustice, but what we are dealing with now is not just an individual act of violence. We are confronting a culture that has allowed certain officers to operate without consequence, protected by silence, fear, and systemic failure. She turned to Maya, her voice softening. "Ms. Johnson, would you please return to the stand, as I—" Maya approached. She noticed Rachel already seated at the defense table, eyes glassy, jaw slack. She looked older now, smaller, like the weight of truth had eroded something inside her. Her lawyer was no longer beside her. She had withdrawn from the case 2 days earlier without public explanation. Maya took the stand and looked straight at Rachel. "Do you know how many names are inside these files?" Maya began, holding up a printed report. 17. 177 young women who were arrested, assaulted, or silenced under falsified charges tied to Officer Halverson's patrol logs. 3 of them lost jobs. 2 lost scholarships. 1 took her own life, and every single one of them was told the same thing. "You fit the description." She paused, letting the words settle. "What was the description, Officer Halverson?" Rachel didn't answer. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Maya leaned in, voice sharper now. "Say it. What was the description?" Rachel's lips trembled. "I don't know." "You do know," Maya pressed. "You knew every time. You didn't need a name. You didn't need a report. All you needed was a face like mine." The judge looked down, clearing her throat. "Ms. Johnson, do you wish to submit the contents of the drive into evidence?" Maya handed it over. Let the system see itself, unfiltered. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence as the bailiff inserted the flash drive into the overhead system. A projection screen lit up behind the judge, displaying file names, each marked with dates and case numbers. Then the first audio file began to play. A grainy conversation between Rachel and 2 other officers filled the room, their laughter disgusting, their words casual and cruel. "You see that kid? That's my 3rd collar this week. You gotta keep the numbers up, man. You know internal ain't gonna do just say the body cam glitched. What about the mom? She ain't gonna fight. They never do." As the audio ended, Maya saw tears streaming down the face of a woman in the front row. She recognized her from earlier conversations. She had lost her daughter 2 years ago under circumstances eerily similar. She wasn't crying from shock. She was crying from confirmation. The judge turned back to Rachel. "Do you deny that this is your voice?" Rachel didn't respond. "Do you deny the actions described in these files?" Rachel's hands trembled on the table. Her lips moved again. "I was just doing my job." Maya spoke before the judge could. "Your job was to protect and serve. You protected yourself, and you served your fear." A woman in the audience shouted, "Preach!" Another clapped. The judge silenced the room again, but even she didn't look angry this time, just tired, so tired. Maya stepped down from the stand as the court adjourned for the day. Outside, microphones were shoved in her face. Cameras followed her to the steps. But she didn't speak to them, not yet. Instead, she walked past the crowd, down the street, and into a quiet church where Jada and her mother waited. She stood up, embraced Maya tightly, and whispered, "You didn't just clear her name. You gave her back her future." That night, Maya sat in her apartment again, but this time it was different. She opened a folder that Marissa had sent just hours earlier. New files, newer connections, names of officials who had signed off on disciplinary reports, emails that showed who had covered Rachel's trail. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a larger war. But for the first time, Maya didn't feel like she was fighting alone. The next morning, the judge called an emergency session. Based on the evidence submitted, a federal investigation was officially launched. Rachel Halverson was placed under immediate arrest in front of everyone. As officers cuffed her, Maya watched. The woman's face crumble, not from the cuffs, but from the reality that no one stood up to stop it. The silence that had once protected her had turned on her. Before leaving the courthouse, Maya passed by Rachel one last time. Their eyes met. Rachel, voice hoarse, whispered, "Why'd you go so far?" Maya didn't blink. "Because I had to. Because you never thought I would." She turned, walked out into the sunlight. The courthouse doors closing behind her, with the weight of history shifting ever so slightly in their hinges. And still, one question remained, sitting quietly in the hearts of everyone who watched her. Walk away. If one woman could bring this much truth into the light, what would happen when others followed? The weight of what had unfolded inside that courtroom didn't stay within its walls. It seeped into the streets of Birmingham like a slow, steady tide. News vans remained parked outside the courthouse long after the judge had adjourned the emergency hearing. Protesters, students, retired veterans, and families of former victims began to gather on the sidewalks, holding signs that didn't just call out one officer, but demanded accountability from an entire institution. The footage of Rachel being handcuffed had already circled the nation, replayed across platforms, dissected by analysts, reposted by influencers, and discussed in classrooms. But behind the virality of it all, Maya felt something deeper beginning to shift, something more personal and unsettling. As the woman responsible for forcing the world to look at what it refused to see, she found herself facing a quiet question. Every time she looked in the mirror, what now? The attention brought both admiration and discomfort. On one hand, Maya was being hailed as a hero, a catalyst, a woman who used discipline and truth as weapons. People stopped her on the street to shake her hand, to thank her, to cry in front of her. Strangers emailed her long letters about their own encounters, their fears, their sons and daughters. But every pat on the back carried weight. Every thank you for your service echoed with layers that went beyond military deployment. She hadn't asked to become a symbol. She had only wanted to make one wrong right. Now the wrongs were stacking up like dominoes, and the entire system was tilting. Jada had started attending classes again, but her posture had changed. No longer the quiet, unsure student who talked with hesitation, she now moved like a young woman who had seen someone fight for her and realized she was worth the fight. One evening, she joined Maya for dinner, sitting across the table at a quiet diner, eyes heavy with something unspoken. She stirred her soda absently and then looked up. "Does it ever stop?" Jada asked. "The feeling that the next time you walk into a room, someone's going to try to take it all away from you again?" Maya leaned back, her voice low. "No, it doesn't. But eventually, you stop asking if the room is safe and start asking if you're willing to change the room." Jada nodded slowly. "I used to think it was enough just to stay out of trouble. Like if I played by the rules, nothing bad would happen, but now I get it. The rules weren't made for us, not all of them." Maya didn't smile, but there was something in her expression. Pride, perhaps, or grief disguised as understanding. She reached across the table and placed a hand on Jada's wrist. "The goal isn't to break the rules. It's to rewrite them." Meanwhile, The department was unraveling. 3 officers named in Maya's files had been placed under investigation. One had already resigned, leaving behind a short, bitter statement blaming cancel culture for her downfall. The chief of police gave a press conference, face pale, trying to control the narrative while community leaders called for deeper inquiries. Maya had been invited to attend private meetings with local officials, lawyers, even a delegation from the Department of Justice. Some wanted advice. Some wanted her to testify again. Some just wanted to be seen near her, hoping her presence might lend them credibility in the storm. But with every meeting, Maya felt something twisting in her gut. It wasn't imposter syndrome. She knew what she had done, and she knew it mattered. But she could feel a familiar pattern forming. The same system that had tried to silence her now wanted to hold her up as a token of reform, to use her face to sell the illusion of progress. They wanted a photo op, a quote, something to post on their websites, and deep down, Maya wrestled with the weight of it. Was real change actually happening, or was the machine just adapting to survive? In one of those meetings, seated at a polished conference table with 3 city officials, one of them leaned forward and said, "We'd like you to lead a new civilian oversight board. Independent, transparent. You'd be the perfect figure to launch it." Maya looked at her carefully. Would I have authority, or just visibility? The woman hesitated. You'd have input. Maya raised a hand, cutting her off. That's not what I asked. The silence that followed said everything. Maya rose from her chair and gave a small nod. Call me when you're ready to dismantle something, not just repackage it. Back in her apartment that night, Maya stared at her reflection again. Her phone buzzed with calls she ignored. Messages flooded her inbox, some supportive, some venomous, a few death threats. She wasn't shaken by them. She'd seen worse. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that exposure had its price. She was no longer just Maya Johnson, former Navy SEAL. She was now a symbol to some, a threat to others, a question mark to many. And with every symbol comes a burden. The next morning, she met with Marissa, who had continued digging. Over coffee, Marissa placed a thin stack of papers on the table between them. There's more, she said. Maya picked up the top sheet, reading slowly. It detailed financial transactions, small at first, then increasingly larger, funneled through shell companies tied to private contractors. Rachel's name appeared again. So did 2 judges, one of whom had presided over multiple cases involving black defendants whose charges had mysteriously escalated after arrest. They weren't just covering up police abuse, Marissa said. They were profiting off it. Maya leaned back, the implications crashing over her like cold water. This wasn't just about racism. It wasn't just about brutality. It was a business, and people had been bought, sold, silenced, and incarcerated for profit. The scandal that began with one kick in a courtroom was about to expose a corruption network that went far beyond Birmingham. But then came the dilemma. To release the files publicly would ignite a firestorm, legal, political, and deeply personal. Maya had already risked everything once, but this time the stakes were higher. People could lose everything: reputations, jobs, safety. And Maya had to decide whether to keep pushing or to let the current investigation take its course. That night, she sat in a dimly lit room with her father. He watched her with the eyes of someone who had already lost too much in life to trust. Peace when it finally arrived. He reached out, touched her hand, and said, "You don't have to carry it all, baby. You've done more than enough." Maya looked at him, voice barely above a whisper. "I know. But if I stop now, what's the cost of silence?" He didn't answer. He just squeezed her hand tighter. Maya stood the next morning at a press podium. Cameras flashing, reporters yelling questions. She had decided the files were going public, not through a leak, not through an anonymous drop, but through full, transparent disclosure. She would speak on record, and when she did, she wouldn't just name names. She would name the patterns, the structures, the way power twisted truth. And most of all, she would name the victims, the forgotten ones, the quiet ones, the ones who didn't get a courtroom or a video to tell their story. But as she looked out at the sea of faces before her, Maya didn't feel triumphant. She felt the weight of the moment. And deep in her chest, a single question beat like a drum. When the truth is finally visible, will the world be brave enough to see it? Because exposing the system was never the hard part. The hard part was facing what came after. The day of the press conference arrived under gray skies, the kind of overcast weight that made everything feel heavier. The city had shifted. There was a different kind of silence now, tense, expectant, not born out of fear but from the anticipation of change. People gathered outside the city courthouse, lining the steps, holding handmade signs with names and dates and faces. Stories that had never made the news but were carried like sacred scars in the memories of mothers, sisters, aunts, and neighbors. Maya stood inside the courthouse lobby, staring at her own reflection in the tinted glass doors. She adjusted the cuffs of her sleeves, not out of vanity, but because her hands needed something to do. Behind her, Marissa waited with a manila folder pressed to her chest. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They'd said all there was to say the night before, when they sat on Maya's couch in silence, file after file spread across the table like evidence at a crime scene too large for any jury. A soft knock on the glass snapped Maya out of her thoughts. Aisha Wallace stood on the other side, now officially suspended for her role in leaking the internal documents. She looked tired, eyes ringed with fatigue, but there was no regret in her face. Maya opened the door and stepped outside, nodding to her with quiet gratitude. Aisha handed her a small slip of paper, her voice low, almost drowned by the growing murmur of the crowd behind them. One more, a name I didn't want to believe until I saw the confirmation this morning. She was the one signing off on Rachel's pay bonuses. She's been laundering contractor money through city development projects. Maya read the name and felt something shift in her chest. It was a city councilwoman who had publicly praised her just days before, standing beside her in front of cameras, promising reform. Maya folded the paper and placed it in her pocket. She didn't react, not visibly. But inside, it burned. Stepping up to the podium was unlike anything she'd done before. Combat had prepared her for physical confrontation, for strategy and endurance. But this wasn't combat. This was exposure, and there was no armor for what was about to happen. The crowd hushed as she began to speak. Her voice wasn't loud, but every word was deliberate, weighted, and clear. She spoke of systems, not just women. She spoke of habits, not just incidents. She described how silence becomes policy, how protection becomes power, and how power, when unchecked, becomes a weapon. She didn't dramatize it. She didn't need to. The files spoke for themselves, the audio recordings, the financial trails, the falsified reports. It was all there. Halfway through, she paused. Her eyes scanned the crowd and landed on a face she didn't expect. Sharon Halverson, Rachel's wife. She wasn't with the press or standing beside officials. She was in the back, holding their daughter's hand, face drawn with something deeper than grief. When Maya's eyes met hers, she didn't look away. She simply nodded, a quiet, broken acknowledgement that something in her world had been cracked open too. After the conference, Maya walked through the crowd, answering questions briefly, redirecting focus where it belonged, on the victims, on the people whose names had never been spoken into microphones. Reporters asked if she planned to run for office. Activists asked if she'd lead the next movement. She gave no promises. She wasn't interested in titles. She was interested in change that didn't need her face to exist. That night, back in her apartment, Maya found herself pacing. Her father called, just as the sky began to darken. She answered on the second ring, and before he could say anything, she said, "I'm okay, Dad." His voice was warm, soft, but there was a heaviness to it. "I know you are, baby. But okay ain't always enough. You carrying so many voices on your back, and I just want to make sure you ain't forgetting your own." Maya sat down, rubbing her hands together slowly. "It's hard to hear my own voice through all of this. Feels like I'm living in echo chambers. Everyone wants something. They want me to be something." Her father let the silence stretch. "You already are something. You just forgot what it sounds like to breathe." Later that evening, Maya met Marissa and Aisha in a private meeting room above a quiet bookstore downtown. Aisha had brought a final set of files, records of sealed settlements between the city and families who had threatened to sue the department in past years. One of them included a case Maya had never seen from a decade ago, where a black high school senior was arrested and injured by Rachel Halverson. Charges were dropped, but the city paid the family a confidential settlement. The student, according to the last record, had attempted suicide the following year. Maya read the file in silence, pressing her hand against her temple. Marissa watched her closely. "We can include it in an extra release," she said. "Or, we can hold it. Your call." Maya looked up, eyes narrowed. "We don't hold anything. Not anymore." The dilemma wasn't whether to continue. The dilemma was how to continue without becoming consumed by the very thing she was fighting. There was a danger in becoming a symbol. People expect you to never falter, never hesitate, never question the path once you've lit it. But Maya was still human, still haunted by the thought of how close she had come to walking away from all of it, how easy it would have been to justify silence. A week later, the Department of Justice issued a public statement announcing a full federal probe into the Birmingham Police Department. Several top officials were subpoenaed. The city councilwoman whose name Aisha had handed Maya was arrested during a midnight raid. Footage of the arrest showed her in disbelief, shouting about being a friend of reform. Maya didn't watch. It lived. She read about it the next day in a news summary someone left on her doorstep. She didn't smile. There was no satisfaction, only a deep, settling understanding that the path forward was long, and this was just the beginning. One evening, Maya returned to the same church she had visited with Jada and her aunt. She sat in the back pew, unnoticed, as a community meeting unfolded at the front. People discussed the future, new policies, new accountability boards, demands for youth programs and community oversight. At one point, a young woman stood up and said, "I don't want a savior. I want systems that work, whether someone like Maya exists or not." The crowd murmured in agreement. Maya nodded to herself. That was the point. That was the goal. She had never wanted to be a savior. After the meeting, as people left, a little girl, no older than 9, approached her. She wore a navy blue hoodie, hands stuffed in her pocket, and stared up with wide eyes. "You the lady from the video?" she asked. Maya crouched down, meeting her gaze. "Yeah, that's me." The girl tilted her head. "Did it hurt?" Maya smiled softly. "Yeah, but not the way you think." The girl nodded like she understood, though maybe she didn't. Still, she reached out and bumped her fist against Maya's. "My mom says you made it safer for me." Maya watched her walk away, her chest tight with something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in weeks. Hope. Back at home, Maya finally allowed herself to breathe. She stood on her balcony looking out at the city that was still flawed, still fractured, but finally acknowledging its reflection. The sky had cleared. The stars were faint above the city lights, but they were there. She closed her eyes, let the night air settle around her, and whispered a quiet promise to herself, not to fight forever, but to always fight when it mattered. And deep within her, there was a peace beginning to bloom. Not because everything had been fixed, but because something had been forced into the light. And in the light, nothing can hide for long. 6 months later, the city of Birmingham looked different. Not on the surface. Buildings still stood where they always had. The courthouse remained unchanged in its facade, and patrol cars still moved through neighborhoods. But beneath the concrete, in the hearts of its people and the silence of its institutions, something had shifted. Investigations had expanded. Federal oversight committees now operated from within the city, auditing, questioning, reviewing years of buried documents. Several officers quietly resigned, while others were publicly dismissed after refusing to cooperate. The police department underwent restructuring, and new leadership was installed. Leaders not chosen for their silence, but for their integrity, accountability, and their connection to the community they served. A civilian review board was created, and this time with actual authority. But Maya didn't chair it. She recommended Aisha Wallace for the position. Aisha accepted, not for redemption, but because she believed no one else would protect it with the same fire she now carried. As for Rachel Halverson, her trial was swift. The evidence was insurmountable, and her defense crumbled under the weight of documented patterns. Former colleagues testified against her, and her own words, recorded and replayed in court, became the nails in the coffin of her reputation. She was convicted, not only for the assault on Maya, but also for obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, and civil rights violations. During sentencing, she didn't speak, not a word. She stared ahead, hollow, the same uniform that once gave her unchecked power now reduced to an orange jumpsuit behind bulletproof glass. Maya didn't attend the sentencing. She didn't need to. Justice had arrived, not through vengeance, but through exposure, and that was enough. Jada graduated. She walked across the stage with a steady smile, the weight of false accusations, no longer chained to her back. In her graduation speech, chosen by her class, she said, "I thought survival meant keeping my head down. Now I know survival means using your voice, even when it shakes." Her mother cried through the entire ceremony. Maya watched from the back of the auditorium, not wanting attention, just presence. Afterward, Jada found her outside and, without a word, hugged her tighter than she ever had. No speeches, just two women bound by blood and a battle they never asked for, but had no choice but to fight. Marissa returned to D.C., where she took a position with a nonprofit dedicated to digital justice and ethical hacking for civil accountability. She still checked in with Maya, sending updates and files now and then, knowing the fight didn't end just because headlines faded. The two women had grown beyond colleagues, sisters, forged not in combat, but in the resistance of silence. Maya herself didn't stay in Birmingham after the final round of interviews and formal testimonies, after she had ensured the files were placed in the public record, and that the oversight systems were no longer dependent on individuals. She left, not in secrecy, not in retreat, but in quiet strength. She traveled for a while, visited her mother's grave in Richmond, and then settled in Atlanta, where she began working with a national initiative training young black women and men in community defense, law literacy, and civic engagement. She taught not how to fight, but how to recognize when a system begins to rot and how to challenge it with courage, not chaos. What surprised her most was the letters, hundreds of them, from students, from military veterans, from officers, from parents. Each one a piece of a larger truth, that people were listening, that what began as an act of resistance had become a chain reaction of awareness. In a world where outrage fades quickly, Maya's story lingered, not because of spectacle, but because of substance. And yet, despite the victories, there were moments when Maya sat in stillness, remembering the quiet after the courtroom cleared, the moment just before everything changed. She thought of the officer's foot against her chest, of the silence that followed, of the fire it ignited not just in her, but in an entire city. That silence, once used to suppress, had become a roar of awakening, and that, she knew, would never be reversed. Now, let me ask you, the one listening to this story, How many times have you watched injustice and stayed silent? How often have you felt the weight of a system pressing down on someone who looks like you, or someone you love, or maybe a complete stranger, and chose to look away, not out of cruelty, but out of fear that one voice wouldn't matter? This story isn't about a courtroom. It's not about a badge or a title. It's about the moment when someone who was supposed to break stood up. Maya didn't win because she fought harder. She won because she refused to be reshaped by the hands trying to crush her. She took the very silence meant to bury her and turned it into a weapon of truth. She didn't become a hero by seeking revenge. She became one by seeking justice that could outlive her. So what would you do if the room turned against you? If your skin became your sentence? Would you kneel, or would you rise? This story asked that question. Now it's asking you. Let us know in the comments what part of this story hit you the hardest. Which moment made you pause and reflect? What do you believe needs to change, and how do you see yourself as part of that change? And if this story moved you, if it opened something in you that you hadn't seen before, don't forget to subscribe to Tales of Truth, because here, the stories aren't just stories. They're mirrors. They're sparks, and every truth is a reminder that justice always finds a way through. We'll see you in the next one. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pristine black Tesla Model 3 as Marissa Williams drove through downtown. The 17-year-old's hands rested confidently on the steering wheel, her graduation ring catching the light as she made a careful turn at the intersection. The car had been a surprise gift from her parents just 2 days ago, a reward for graduating, as valedictorian from Hamilton High School. Marissa had spent hours learning every feature of the vehicle, studying the manual until late into the night. Her mother, state attorney Diana Williams, had taught her exactly how to behave if she ever got pulled over. Hands visible, movements slow, documents ready. "It shouldn't be necessary," her mother had said with a tight smile, "but it's the world we live in." As Marissa cruised down Madison Avenue, she didn't notice the police cruiser that had begun following her 3 blocks back. Inside that cruiser, Officer Jane Peterson sat with her eyes fixed on the Tesla, her fingers drumming against the steering wheel. In her 15 years on the force, she had developed what she called a sixth sense about suspicious vehicles. To her, a young black woman in an expensive car set off all kinds of red flags. The Tesla's turn signal blinked as Marissa prepared to turn onto Oak Street. Officer Peterson had seen enough. She flipped on her lights, and the siren chirped twice. Marissa's heart sank as she checked her rearview mirror. She'd been doing everything right, driving exactly at the speed limit, making complete stops, using her signals. But here she was, being pulled over anyway. Following her mother's instructions, Marissa pulled over smoothly, positioning the car in a well-lit area near a coffee shop where several people were sitting outside. She turned off the engine, placed her hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, and took a deep breath. Her wallet was in her back pocket, and the car's documents were in the glove compartment, but she knew better than to reach for either until asked. Officer Peterson approached the driver's side window, her hand resting casually on her holster, a detail that didn't escape Marissa's notice. The officer's face was set in a stern expression as she shone her flashlight directly into the car, even though it was still daylight. "License and registration," Officer Peterson barked, not bothering with any preliminary greeting. "Yes, ma'am," Marissa replied politely, keeping her voice steady. "My license is in my back pocket, and the registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for them now, if that's okay." The officer nodded curtly, her flashlight beam following Marissa's every movement. In the coffee shop window, several customers had turned to watch the scene unfold. A few had already taken out their phones. Marissa handed over her license and registration with steady hands. The documents were pristine. The registration was barely 2 days old, and her license still had that new card shine to it. Officer Peterson studied them with obvious skepticism. "This your car?" the officer asked, her tone making it clear she didn't believe it could be. Yes, ma'am. It was a graduation gift from my parents. Officer Peterson's eyebrows rose. A mighty expensive graduation gift. Where you go to school? I just graduated from Hamilton High School, ma'am. I was valedictorian. Marissa kept her voice level, even as she felt her pulse quickening. Step out of the vehicle, Officer Peterson commanded suddenly. May I ask why, ma'am? Have I done something wrong? I said step out of the vehicle, the officer repeated, her hand tightening on her holster. We've had reports of stolen vehicles in the area. Marissa felt a familiar mix of frustration and fear rising in her chest. This was exactly what her mother had warned her about, exactly what they'd practiced for. Still, keeping her movements slow and deliberate, she unbuckled her seatbelt. Outside the coffee shop, more people had gathered to watch. Several phones were now recording the interaction. Among the onlookers was Ms. Chen, Marissa's former math teacher, who had immediately recognized her star student. She pulled out her phone, but instead of recording, she started typing a message to someone she knew needed to be informed about this situation. As Marissa carefully stepped out of her car, she stood tall and dignified, just as her mother had taught her. She was wearing her Hamilton High School letterman jacket, her valedictorian medal still pinned to the lapel. The irony wasn't lost on her. Just 2 days ago, she'd been giving a graduation speech about progress and equality. And now here she was, living proof of how far they still had to go. Officer Peterson's next words would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the entire police department to its core, though neither of them knew it yet. Face the car and put your hands on the hood, Officer Peterson commanded, her voice carrying across the now quiet street. Marissa complied, feeling the warm metal beneath her palms. The Tesla's black surface reflected her face, and she forced herself to maintain her composure. Behind them, the crowd outside the coffee shop had grown larger. Ms. Chen, Marissa's former math teacher, was now on the phone, speaking quickly and quietly. Several other bystanders had their phones raised, recording everything. The evening sun cast long shadows across the scene, making it look like a stage drama unfolding in real time. Ma'am, Marissa said calmly, I can prove this is my car. There's a video of my parents giving it to me at my graduation party. It's right here on my phone. Did I say you could speak? Officer Peterson snapped, moving closer. You expect me to believe a kid like you can afford a Tesla? These cars cost more than most houses around here. The officer began a rough pat-down, checking Marissa's pockets. She pulled out the girl's phone, wallet, and car keys, placing them on the hood of the car. When she opened the wallet, she found not only Marissa's driver's license, but also her student ID card, showing her as class valedictorian, several academic achievement awards, and a photo of her with her parents at her graduation. Officer Peterson ignored these items. Instead, she picked up Marissa's phone, now buzzing with incoming messages. The screen showed a text from Mom with, "The preview reading, son, are you okay?" Ms. Chen just called, "Looks like you're trying to get your story straight with someone," the officer said, her tone accusatory. She dropped the phone back onto the hood with a clatter. A second police car pulled up, lights flashing. Officer Sarah Martinez stepped out, taking in the scene before her. She had worked with Peterson before and knew her reputation for making questionable stops. Her eyes moved from Marissa's letterman jacket to the growing crowd of witnesses. "What's the situation, Peterson?" she asked, approaching cautiously. "Possible grand theft auto," Peterson replied. "Subject claims the car was a gift, but you know how these stories go." Officer Martinez noticed the academic medals on Marissa's jacket and the wallet contents spread across the car's hood. Something wasn't adding up. She picked up Marissa's student ID and examined it closely. "Hamilton High valedictorian?" she asked Marissa directly. "Yes, ma'am," Marissa replied respectfully. "I just graduated 2 days ago. This car was a gift from my parents. My mother is—" "I said quiet," Peterson interrupted, taking a step closer to Marissa. "Martinez, check the car." These models are hot items for theft right now. Officer Martinez walked around the Tesla, noting the fresh registration papers visible through the windshield. Meanwhile, Ms. Chen had finally gotten through to someone important. She spoke urgently into her phone. "Yes, Ms. Williams, they've got her spread out on the hood of the car right now. Your daughter is being perfectly polite, but this officer, you need to get here quickly." The situation was getting more tense by the minute. More people had gathered, and the murmurs from the crowd were growing louder. Someone in the crowd shouted, "She's just a kid! Leave her alone!" Peterson's face reddened at the crowd's reaction. "Everyone stay back," she shouted. "This is a police investigation." Marissa remained still, her hands on the hood, but her mind was racing. She knew her mother would be on her way now. She just had to stay calm and follow the protocol they had practiced. Still, she couldn't help but notice how Officer Martinez kept looking at her student ID and then at her expression growing increasingly concerned. "Peterson," Martinez said quietly, "I think we should double-check. I've seen this before." Peterson cut her off. "Nice car, fake ID, sob story about it being a gift. Classic setup." Just then, Marissa's phone buzzed again on the hood of the car. The screen lit up with another message from her mother. "5 minutes away. Keep calm. Remember what we practiced." Officer Peterson reached for her handcuffs, the metal gleaming in the evening light. The crowd's murmurs turned to protests. Ms. Chen was now recording too, her hands shaking but her phone steady. Officer Martinez took a step forward, clearly uncomfortable with how the situation was escalating. What happened next would be played on every local news station by morning. But for now, the tension in the air was electric, as Officer Peterson made a decision that would change her career forever. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around Marissa's wrists as Officer Peterson roughly pulled her arms behind her back. The crowd's angry voices grew louder, but Peterson seemed to take their reaction as confirmation that she was doing something right. Officer Martinez stood to the side, her face showing clear discomfort with the situation. "You have the right to remain silent," Peterson began, reciting the Miranda rights, her voice carrying across the now packed sidewalk. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Ms. Chen pushed her way to the front of the crowd, her phone still recording. "This is absolutely ridiculous," she called out. "I've known Marissa for 4 years. She's the brightest student I've ever taught." Officer Peterson ignored her, continuing with the rights as she guided Marissa toward the police car. Marissa walked with her head held high, remembering her mother's words. "If the worst happens, stay dignified. Let them see your strength, not your fear." Officer Martinez approached her partner, speaking in a low voice. "Peterson, look at her school ID again. Something's not right here. Maybe we should verify." "You're too soft, Martinez." Peterson cut her off. "Rich car, wrong neighborhood, wrong kid. Do the math." Just then, a sleek black SUV with government plates came screeching around the corner. It pulled up behind the police cars, its tires squealing slightly on the asphalt. The crowd turned to look, many still recording with their phones. Marissa, now standing beside the police car, felt a small smile form on her lips. She knew that. Vehicle. She knew what was about to happen. State Attorney Diana Williams stepped out of the SUV, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit despite the late hour. Her presence commanded immediate attention, and several people in the crowd gasped in recognition. Behind her, 2 assistant attorneys emerged, carrying briefcases. "Officer Peterson," the state attorney's voice boomed across the street, "I suggest you remove those handcuffs from my daughter immediately." The color drained from Peterson's face. She froze, one hand still on Marissa's arm. "Officer," Martinez's eyes widened as she finally understood why the student ID had seemed so familiar. She had seen the state attorney's photo countless times at the precinct. "Your daughter?" Peterson stammered, her confidence evaporating. "Marissa Williams," Diana Williams said, walking closer. "Valedictorian of Hamilton High School. Recipient of a full scholarship to Yale University. And yes, my daughter. The young woman you just arrested for driving her graduation present. The crowd had fallen completely silent, phones still recording as the scene unfolded. Ms. Chen had a satisfied smile on her face as she continued to document everything. I was just following protocol, Peterson tried to explain, but her voice was weak. Protocol? State Attorney Williams raised an eyebrow. Please, explain which protocol involves arresting a minor without cause, ignoring valid identification, and dismissing proof of ownership. She turned to Officer Martinez. Remove those handcuffs, please. Martinez quickly stepped forward, hands slightly shaking as she unlocked the handcuffs. Marissa rubbed her wrists, but maintained her composure, just as she'd been taught. Mom, Marissa said quietly, everything's on their body cameras. State Attorney Williams nodded. Indeed it is, sweetheart. She turned to address both officers. I want those cameras secured immediately. We'll be reviewing every second of footage from the moment you began following my daughter's car. Peterson's face had turned ashen. Her body camera suddenly felt very heavy on her chest. Behind her, several senior officers were now arriving at the scene, likely alerted by dispatch about the state attorney's presence. Ms. Williams, Officer Martinez stepped forward. I want to apologize. Save it for the official. Our investigation, Williams interrupted, firmly but not unkindly. Right now, I'm taking my daughter home. But tomorrow morning, we're going to have a very long conversation about racial profiling in this department. As Marissa collected her belongings from the hood of her Tesla, the crowd began to applaud. Ms. Chen stepped forward to give her a quick hug. I knew your mother would fix this, she whispered. Marissa got back into her car, her mother's SUV pulling in behind her to escort her home. As they drove away, Officer Peterson stood rooted to the spot, watching her career crumble before her eyes. The night wasn't over yet, but the real storm would begin tomorrow morning at the precinct. Behind her, Martinez was already on her radio, calling in what had happened to their superior officers. The crowd slowly dispersed, their phones filled with footage that would soon be all over. Social media. This incident would change not just Peterson's life, but the entire department's approach to traffic stops. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead as Officer Peterson sat at her desk, filling out what she knew might be her last police report. It was 9 p.m., but the station was unusually active. News of what had happened with the state attorney's daughter had spread like wildfire through the department. Captain Roberta stood in her office, phone pressed to her ear, face growing redder by the minute. Through the glass walls, everyone could see her pacing back and forth, the blinds open. Officers walking past could catch snippets of her conversation. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. I understand the severity. Yes, the body camera footage is secured. At the front desk, Officer Martinez was giving her statement to Internal Affairs. Her hands wrapped around a paper cup of cold coffee as she described everything she had witnessed. I tried to tell her something wasn't right, she explained to the investigators. The kid's ID, her Letterman jacket, the new car registration, it all checked out. The station door swung open, and a hush fell over the room. State. Attorney Diana Williams walked in, followed by 2 members of her legal team. She had changed from her suit into more casual clothing, but her presence was no less commanding. Officers scrambled to look busy, avoiding eye contact. Captain Roberta rushed out of her office. Ms. Williams, we've been expecting you. Please come this way. Actually, Williams said, her voice carrying across the quiet room, I think we'll need your largest conference room. This isn't just about my daughter anymore. She turned to address the whole station. This is about every young person who's been pulled over for driving while black in this city. Peterson sank lower in her chair, trying to become invisible. But Williams had already spotted her. Officer Peterson, you'll be joining us too. The large conference room quickly filled up. Internal Affairs investigators sat on one side, their laptops open. Captain Roberta and 3 senior officers occupied another side. Williams and her legal team took their positions at the head of the table. Peterson sat alone on the fourth side, looking small in her uniform. "Play the footage," Williams instructed. On the large screen mounted on the wall, the body camera video began to play. Everyone watched in silence as Peterson's entire interaction with Marissa unfolded. The racial profiling was obvious. From the moment Peterson began following the eye, Tesla without cause, through her aggressive questioning to the unjustified arrest. When the video ended, Williams stood up. "This isn't just about one officer's poor judgment," she said, looking around the room. "This is about a system that made Officer Peterson think her actions would be acceptable." She pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the table. "In this folder, I have statistics from the last 5 years. Traffic stops, arrests, and complaints, sorted by race. The numbers tell a very clear story." She paused, letting her words sink in. "A story that ends today." Peterson finally found her voice. "Mom, I want to apologize. I didn't know." "That's precisely the problem," Williams interrupted. "You didn't know Marissa was my daughter, so you thought it was okay to treat her like a criminal. How many other young women have you treated the same way?" "Officer Peterson? Women who didn't have a state attorney for a mother?" Captain Roberta cleared her throat. "What are you proposing, Ms. Williams?" "Complete departmental overhaul," Williams replied without hesitation. "New training protocols, regular bias assessments, community oversight boards, and body camera reviews. Either we fix this systematically, or I take everything I have to the media." The internal affairs investigators were typing frantically, documenting every word. Peterson stared at her hands, her career flashing before her eyes. "As for Officer Peterson," Williams continued, "I'm not calling for her badge yet." Everyone looked up in surprise. "Instead, I want her to be part of the solution: community service, bias training, and regular meetings with community leaders. Sometimes the best advocates for change are those who've seen their own prejudices clearly for the first time." The meeting continued late into the night. Outside the conference room, officers gathered in small groups discussing the changes that were coming. Some looked worried, others relieved. At the front desk, a photo of Marissa at her graduation ceremony still lay where Martinez had placed it earlier, a reminder that behind every traffic stop was a human being with a story. The station's old ways were ending, and a new chapter was beginning, whether they were ready or not. Change was coming to the department, and it was coming fast. The morning sun had barely risen when the local news vans began gathering outside the police station. Reporters clutched their coffee cups, checking their phones constantly for updates. The video of Marissa's arrest had gone viral overnight, with millions of views across social media platforms. Inside her small apartment, Ms. Chen watched the morning news while preparing for school. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since last night. News channels wanted to interview her, and her video of the incident had been shared thousands of times. She smiled, remembering Marissa's dignity throughout the ordeal. The TV anchor's voice filled her living room. Breaking news. Video. Shows local police officer arresting the daughter of State Attorney Diana Williams in what appears to be a clear case of racial profiling. The 17-year-old honors student was driving a graduation gift. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below. Subscribe to the channel for more captivating story videos.